Waves of protests took place last summer in support of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Police mostly kept their distance, giving protesters the space to voice their message.
But not all cops are bad. 90% of cops are good. You know what I tell them, cops? How come 4 out of 4 cops were not good for George Floyd?
I'm here against police brutality against indigenous population, against black people, against minorities.
I know what it feels like to be discriminated by the police and harassed, because I've seen that most of my life up north, and it needs to stop.
However, Premier François Legault denied that systemic racism exists within the province. But is he still denying it? In this episode, we'll be looking at systemic racism within different sectors in Quebec. I'm Savannah Craig, and this is Local 514. Last week, the coroner's report on the death of Joyce Echaquan, an Atikamekw woman who died in September 2020 due to a pulmonary edema, was released. She died in a hospital in the north of Montreal. The report identified that she was treated in a racist and prejudiced way. Footage was filmed by Echaquan herself, displaying the treatment by nurses who were helping her. This led to outrage and protests by Quebecers. However, Legault is still denying that systemic racism exists within the province. He said that this is instead an isolated incident. This is what Legault had to say when questioned on systemic racism last fall.
Do you think that saying things, particularly acknowledging the systemic racism that the Indigenous community people believe that there is, do you think that's something that should be done? I know this has been something asked you already, but I feel we should ask again.
Okay. I think for me, when we talk about systemic racism, for me it's in relation with the black people in the United States, for a reason we know. For me, I don't see that in Quebec. But for sure, there is some racism against the First Nation in Quebec, and I want to fight. I want to be the government who will do the most actions to take against racism against the First Nations.
Coroner Jehan Kamel was asked if Echaquan might still be alive if she were white. She responded, "I think so." The coroner's report identified that Echaquan's care was affected because medical staff assumed that she was suffering from withdrawal. This is not true. Following Joyce's death, 1,200 employees at the same hospital were given at least 3 hours of cultural safety training. And some of the Atikamekw community members were given prominent roles in the healthcare board. Despite these efforts, Legault refuses to acknowledge Joyce's principle. These are recommendations drafted to guarantee proper and prejudice-free healthcare for Indigenous people to be enshrined in provincial law. And Legault will not acknowledge this as it references systemic racism.
The presentation of the report of Mrs. Kamel was broadcast all across Canada. Yeah. And now you're coming back today and you have this definition in Le Petit Robert of what systemic racism, or the word systemic, means. Are you humanly capable of recognizing there is systemic racism in Quebec with this specific story and other stories?
I'm capable to say that what happened to Mrs. Echaquan is terrible. And few employees, not only one, few employees didn't deliver the right services to her. It's unacceptable. And we already made some changes. We now have somebody on the board in Joliette. We have somebody as the assistant of the president. We have some people also that are making sure that each patient are followed in the system. So I do agree. The only place where I don't agree is when we say that there's a system. Because for me, a system is coming from upstairs, coming from the top people, and I don't see this in the healthcare network, for example. So what I say is, instead and we know in Quebec we have a certain percentage of Quebecers saying that there is systemic racism, and a part of the population saying there's no systemic racism. But almost all Quebecers, they say there is some racism in Quebec, and we have to fight all together. Stop dividing Quebecers, all work together. And I think also we have to admit that, yes, there is some racism in Quebec, but less than many other places.
Why do you say so?
Because we are a progressist society in Quebec, and I think that the situation is not perfect, but it's not as worse as it is in some part of the United States, for example.
What are you going to do with actions now? Like, you have to prove that you're on top of things if you recognize racism, prejudices, discrimination now. What are the actions you'll put in place to make sure that you are on top of things, even though you don't recognize that the system is racist?
Yeah. So we send a clear message to all top management people in our different system not to tolerate that and correct that if it happens. Second, we started already to train all our employees. For example, in Lanaudière, we already trained 12,000 employees, telling them exactly the context and what the indigenous people live in the past. So I think that right now there's a clear message. We will not tolerate that some services be different to First Nation than they are to other people in Quebec.
So what other sectors than healthcare are affected by systemic racism in the province? Video journalist Aude Simon spoke to Elijah Olise regarding systemic racism in the justice system. Here's what he had to say.
Well, systemic racism is a term that refers to a form of racism that is embedded in laws and regulations of society, manifesting discrimination in the government bodies such as criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, education, and political representation. Meaning there's an individual representation for racism, but on a systemic level, there are barriers to access and to resources and support for groups which are considered minorities. So when you think about Black and brown people who haven't had access to proper medical care, housing, as well as well-funded schools, these are forms of systemic racism that develop negative outcomes in those lives and the quality of their lives in the long run, past just their own, but in generations, even up to my own generation. If I was to talk a bit about Legault's concept denial of systemic racism, I would definitely have to, it comes from a perspective of somebody who's afraid to be held accountable, as a leader of a government, of a people, it's his job to ensure that those who he's servicing, because that's his civil duty, he's making sure that they have the resources, support, and he's making decisions that align with the health of the community. However, we've seen people like Joyce Echaquan who've lost their lives, due to that manifestation of systemic racism on an individual level within the healthcare system. And she's not the first. She's just the first to be recorded. And that denial really speaks for the fact that we don't have a government that's held accountable for their actions, and somebody who runs away from responsibility and is afraid of taking charge and fixing a problem, because you know, it's like this kind of becomes this hierarchy of oppression at one point, where you have like, well, I am part of an oppressed people, so therefore I cannot oppress others, which as a white man sounds highly ridiculous. I like the part where people say, like, you know, Canadians are being nice, you know, we're nice, Canadians are better than the US. Well, that's not true. You know, in the US, they have studies upon studies about institutional racism, systemic racism, the effects of racism on the mental health, you know, specifically black people, indigenous people and brown people, how their lives are different from their white counterparts. And like, we're speaking about being marginalized, speaking of support, speaking of discrimination within the criminal justice system. But it seems that in Canada we have a lack of any kind of narrative when it comes to the reality of Black, Indigenous people of color, specifically Black and Indigenous people, and to speak to the struggles that they go through, the barriers that they face, discrimination as well. And that's due to, you know, in here, studies and research get things done. You know, knowledge is not just thrown away. So there's this active push to eliminate those kind of studies like happening. I believe that the reluctance stems from a lack of willpower to act and to create change and to fix and design new ways of operating within our system that have everybody who lives in the system represented, supported, and cared for. I think like it's at the end of the day, it's kind of like this club. It's like you're either in or you're out, and you could just be envious. At the end of the day, you know, a lot of Black, Indigenous people of color have made this country what it is, and it's, you know, it's up to the government to actually support their people and support what we call just human behavior. I mean, sorry, it's basic humanity to want to fill that role and to support all of your population, not just some. I definitely believe that we can't have a government who believes in something so false and so far removed from society, far removed from reality, and to be the ones who make decisions for society. I think that I really believe that the government needs to be held accountable by the community, as well as those who understand the true issues and the reality of the lived experience as well of those who experience systemic racism, to empower those who experience systemic racism and the capacity to make decisions and actions that will lead to its dismantling, as well as empowerment of the whole collective. So having, you know, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color at the table, you know, when the decisions are being made, policies are being drafted, especially around housing, healthcare, and around the criminal justice system. And I think that needs to be done now. I mean, there's lots of groups of people who have the capacity and just need the power and the money to do things. And I think the government should do less deciding on those parts and more supporting groups of people and collectives and organizations that and communities specifically who have the action plan to get things done. Specifically Nicholas Gibbs and his life being taken away from him far too soon, murdered by the police. You know, it's not just losing his life during a police intervention, because at the end of the day, that's normalizing the violence that police commit on our population, and understanding that we're supposed to be in a society where we are proud to be Canadians, apparently, but yet cops are still killing innocent Black men, you know, who are having a mental health issue, and there's no justice for them. There's no justice for the family who've lost their lives, who've lost their children. You know, the mom of Nicholas Gibbs, who has to bury her son and see no justice, and just her son's name dragged through the dirt. Understanding that, you know, 93% of the budget of the police goes towards salaries. Understanding that, and understanding that kind of support that we can be poured into the community instead, to support families, you know, who are struggling with mental health, who are struggling with food security, who are struggling with housing security. What kind of changes and improvements we'll see in the quality of their lives, as well as the prevention, like the rate of crime going down. There's real things we can do. And speaking at the mural, I was just trying to share the need for us to have a collective accountability towards our laws and our community and how they're organized, and putting pressure on the government to do the right thing by us. And we can't just let things slide and say, like, it's okay, especially those of us who have the privilege of not experiencing that systemic racism on a daily on a daily basis, but for us to actually be like empathetic towards our neighbors and our family and our friends around us, who we consider family and friends, co-workers as well. You know, at the end of the day, we are what we call Canadian, and you consider myself a minority, but we exist on this planet in a majority. But we don't even have the amount of people that could be here to hold our back and to help us out the way it should be, because of racist immigration laws. So it's up to those who are here today to represent the values of what we call values of our community, you know, about justice, about fairness, about equality, you know, and about living good lives. It's up to us to ensure that all of our people locally are able to do that. And it's not something that we could just drop. It's not something we could just be like, hey, that's not my job, that's the police job. Well, the police are doing what they're doing because you're not saying anything. The government, François Legault, is getting away with murder because at the end of the day, people who've lost their lives to very preventable measures by the hands of the government, that is still murder. And so hopefully we can see a change really soon, and we can see people getting tired of the same old news headlines. And that's the reason why I was there, representing and taking up space as a Black youth around these topics.
Samer Majzoub, the president of the Canadian Muslim Forum, says we should not rely on political parties to handle systemic racism. This is what he had to say about reducing systemic racism in our province while not relying on political parties to do so, and what other sectors are affected.
I guess I'll start with a pretty basic question, but what are your general thoughts on Legault continuing to deny that systemic racism exists in Quebec?
Honestly, as my opinion on this, we do not have to waste much time into argument. What is the name? Is it systematic racism? Is it why this politician is not recognizing this and the other politician may be recognizing it? My concern is much more, what are we doing to address those racism? Because spending a lot of, if you notice lately, all what we are just focusing is it being admitted by politicians or not yet? It is important to be admitted. And there's no doubt about it, because there are issues that we face on a daily basis, but at the same time, it's not our objective. Okay, our objective is, you name it, whatever you want to name it, it does exist. The coroner of Joyce came out and said it does exist. Everyone is saying that it does exist. In no way it means that Quebec is a racist society. I have been living in Quebec for 32 years now. It is a very open, wide society. And those incidents, by the way, are not limited to Quebec. This is one of the things that is so much wrong. It is across the country that we face. We have our people everywhere that report to us many incidents that are related to this. And I mean, we have just to remember the London terror attack. It happened in London, Ontario. So on a personal level, I would like not to politicize the subject. We need really to go directly and deal with it, whether, I mean, and again, it is a racism, whatever there is a word systematic before it or after it, or there is no word of systematic at all, is not the issue. The issue is how to deal with the subject itself.
Do you think, I know you say not to politicize it, but just again on Legault, do you think that with him denying it, it does kind of, I guess, take the responsibility off of his government to address racism within the province?
You know, we have dealt with this subject before, not with Legault, but with many other politicians on the Islamophobia file. I mean, CMF, we have sponsored the Islamophobia file since 2009. It was myself who presented the petition 411, that it was the first time in the history of Canada. We had this Islamophobia condemned at the House of Commons. We met tons of politicians and stakeholders in the society. I mean, everyone has his or her reasons why to admit or not to admit, okay? It could be ideological reason, it could be political reason, but at the end of the day, it doesn't elevate the responsibility of all of us, especially governments, especially politicians. Why politicians? Because they have the more sway over how things goes and over policies and regulations. Whether, I mean, the bottom of the line, trying to run away from it is not a solution. And we have seen this many, many times. All what it happens, it escalates. It makes it more of a problem, not to a one segment of the society. As you can see now, it is widening everywhere we see it, everywhere we hear it, and it is hitting everyone. I mean, it's not limited to one group or the other, and this is one of the things that we would like one day to tackle, that those issues, when it hits everyone, it hits the society as a whole.
And do you think like laws such as the secular law and the French language law, do these laws further racism in our province?
You know what? I usually look at the implications of laws. There is no law 100% wrong and there is no law 100% right. Okay, so we look at the implications like any other things. Okay, so I bring a new medication to the market and we look how it is results. So those laws, are they causing racism or not? Are those causing discrimination or not? This is where it comes to the real point. Instead of going generalizing and going into a debate that it escalates more tension into the subject rather than in tackling it, I go and see exactly, does this law target, for example, Law 21, it clearly target young women in Quebec. I mean, whether we like it or not, everyone is saying it. I mean, when you deprive a young woman like your age, like my daughter's age, from being hired because of what she decides to wear, it is a discrimination. I mean, I'm discriminating against women. When we go to Law 26 or any other law that might really cause such kind of implications, yes, it is causing a discriminatory results. Now, do I go into the argument it is all or not, or do I go to the argument and I fall in the trap of certain political agenda to say, you mean Quebec, all of Quebec? No, no one means anything whatsoever. When you speak about one particular subject, you mean the particular subject itself. Unfortunately, nowadays, there is this game of fear mongering approach. If you talk anything from this side or the other side, I'm not saying about one side only, I'm talking about all sides. We start all, accusing each other of things that are really beyond comprehension, and it ends in creating friction within one society. And that's what we don't want whatsoever.
Earlier, when I had first asked about Legault, you mentioned about, I guess, kind of alluding to direct action and us actually taking action to reduce racism within our society, within Quebec society. If we aren't relying on politicians, what can the public do?
You know what? And this is a very important question. No one can deny the fact that any governments, has more of an authority, of a control, how to deal matters, how to define matters, and how to deal with them. But does not elevate, and that's where I want to reach, elevate the responsibility of each and every one of us. If you don't mind, in a couple of minutes, yesterday, it came to my attention through a local Arabic newspaper, Sada al-Mashriq, of an hatred incident I'm sorry, I have to mention it because this is by how it is mentioned to me, I mean, how it is written, Starbucks by Concordia University. And my understanding of the piece of news that it is everywhere now, but it's in Arabic. I think if someone from your Arabic friends can assist you in translating it. It says that there was, it seems a young woman was targeted to hate and discrimination by some of the employees or one of the employees of Starbucks there. Now, the question is not how hard is this on this young woman, is the fact that none of the people that are present at that space and witnessing the incident intervene. So we're talking about the core of Montreal. We're talking about Concordia University, the most diverse university in Quebec, I believe, and students, colleagues of the same young women. And here we are facing an issue where none of us or none of those people intervene. So the responsibility of fighting racism and discrimination is the responsibility of each and every one of us. Just let's reflect on this for a second. If two or three of the people that are there went to the manager of Starbucks or to the people that are causing this issue and spoke to them, they will know that it is not easy to target women or men or whoever it is because of his or her background. So it is a shared responsibility. It is an educational responsibility. It is a civil rights responsibility. It is a responsibility of each and every one of us to deal with such matter. Otherwise, just to throw the responsibility or the mission over one shoulder and start being, I'm sorry with this, our comfort zone, they're doing nothing, they're not coming to it. What am I doing as a person, as a human, to deal with such subjects?
Thank you. You know, I guess for things like our healthcare system and things like this, is there anything that we can do to push for, I guess, more cultural understanding and reduce racism and essentially have access to healthcare and education for everyone without discrimination?
One other point that we need to, it is what we call political will. I recall very well when we spoke about Islamophobia before, and we were dealing with it. We, at the beginning, noticed lack of political will. There is no real political will. This is what I'm noticing nowadays. At that moment, at this moment yet, there is no political will. When I say political will, I don't mean only for politicians, for each and every one. Let's say when we speak about hospitals, I don't need big parliamentary decision for the administration of the hospital to take a decision to avoid and to stop completely any discriminatory behavior against any woman because of her, because she's indigenous, for example, or this preset perspective about certain groups. So this doesn't need a government imposing on the hospital. It should come from the hospital itself, or from school boards. If school boards comes out and saying, you know what, we are against any sort of discrimination and access should be guaranteed to every and each individual, I don't think we need someone to impose it. So this is where we call, as a CMF, as a humans, as Quebecers, as Canadians, to that each and every one of us, if it is not coming from top to bottom, let's come from the society up. And I believe it is a continuous, ongoing process. It needs time, but it needs a starting points. And I'm so hopeful by the generations that are coming, like your age and others, to tackle the subjects much more serious than the generations that we live in and our generations.
Thank you. You know, last summer we saw a lot of mobilizing around racial injustice, Black Lives Matter. For you, does this kind of represent some of the change within my generation and maybe how we can tackle and reduce racism within our society?
Honestly, it is amazing. It is amazing by all means because mobilization keeps the subject alive. And by no despair in this. As long as you are seeking what is right and refusing what is wrong, one time it will come. You will face resistance across the board. It is never a battle that is a coffee battle. It is a real battle that needs people committed, dedicated, and continuous. Your generation is amazing on this. What I would like to see in your generation when they come to be decision makers, okay, to keep up the same level of commitment and dedication, because you are the people that will come and decide for the future. And this is where I'm hopeful that this will be there. One point I would like to really to mention, in no way we should consider this a race battle. It is not black against white or white against, or a religious battle or a culture battle. It is wrong against, I mean, it is right against wrong. So please, this is important when we go out. And as your age, people that are leading this, to avoid, it is a night bashing of white race. I'm so much against this because it is all of us together. This is the only way how we can achieve at the end of the day. If we turn it a racial war, no one will win at the end.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask, when you say decision makers, what do you mean by that? Like people who are leading these protests and mobilizations?
No, I mean, your age now, mostly are students, mostly are still young, are not yet in a decision making. Some of you, yes, decision making, whether you are elected to office, whether you are at the city level in the future, whether you are a CEO for a company, running a CLSC, you are a doctor in your clinic. All this, that's what I mean, stakeholders, decision maker in the society. This is in the future. So you are the generation that will be holding this. I mean, this is a fact. What happens sometimes, I'm not saying this is in general, that those who are really now enthusiastic about this subject, maybe one day they will be at the political level. This is where I would love to see them at the same dedication as they are now and translate their care and concern into decision making. And this is where our hopes are there. And that's where we push to keep up the momentum of standing up against hate and discrimination at every time, at every occasion.
Thank you for explaining that. I know I keep bringing things back to political parties, but the municipal election is on my mind. And in terms of this subject, do you have any hope that maybe with an upcoming election there could be some change around this? Maybe are there certain policies that you're seeing or promises that are maybe different this time around, especially in regards to a lot more mobilization around racial injustice happening?
Maybe I have to be very brief on this. There are 1,100 cities in Quebec. Okay, so we are talking about a wide range of elections that we're seeing on November 7th. At the same time, city elections, although it is a democratic process, it is more based on services than politics. And this is also we have to put in mind. But at the same time, I see that the metropolitan, for example, Montreal, a bit Laval, there is more understanding of the racial diversity. I see this, I'm in contact with the city officials, whether this administration, the previous administration, and in both levels, I have seen at least, let's say, a recognition of the need of tackle and deal with the racial subject. Now, how much it will be interpreted into actions, I believe after November 7th, this will be seen. I've seen that the city have assigned, one young lady or one lady to deal with the subject, racial discrimination in the city. This is all remain to be seen how it will be dealt with in after November 7th.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I guess, are there any other sectors that you would like to call out aside from the healthcare system that, think needs to kind of be revamped and maybe, has some difficulty with racism?
I believe in general, media has to be importantly the most, whether we like it or not, the most influential factor is media in general and social media. I would love, listen, I have so much value for freedom of expression. But I always say it, I repeat it, I was at the House of Commons in 2017 and we had a live press conference. I said hate speech is not freedom of expression. Hate speech is hate speech. What is the difference? It's clear. If a speech leads to hate, it is hate speech. So freedom, and sometimes there are this mixing and confusion. It could be sometimes intended confusion between what you could call, you know, I have the freedom to express myself and blah, 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 blah. I said, no problem, you can, but please don't spread hate, don't spread rumors. So social media is very important. Sometimes those who have good and beautiful opinions, they are shy to express it. Who expresses their opinions are those who might be spreading hate and discrimination. So you end up with about percentage-wise, 70, 80, 90% of people expressing their opinion, it is hate and discrimination and that. And those who have this beautiful opinion, like you, struggling like you for what is right and against what is wrong, are shy to express it. We end up with spreading of false news and false fake news. And unfortunately, we see it, the results in every aspect. If you don't mind, the two terror attack that we faced, major faced in Canada, the Quebec City mosque and the London, Ontario, both perpetrators to a large extent, they were entrenched with hate and this kind of, you know, against whatever group, Islam or Muslims, mainly through social media, mainly through certain political discourse. So this is where I think one of the most important element, I hope it will be dealt with, and it will diminish a lot this kind of what we see day and night of hate and racism and discrimination, and that unfortunately our society are witnessing nowadays.
And just to follow up on that, I know this is probably complicated to answer, but for you, what's the best way to diminish this? Like more internet laws, more education to kind of, you know, provide more cultural understanding and diminish hate? What is it like?
There is no one answer to this. As you mentioned, it is a confusing, complicated and a bit confusing, and so many inputs in such decisions. But there is no doubt, there's nothing to be shy out to say, to create rules and regulations that people cannot just be in their basements, behind their screens, and spread hate where something extreme element receives it and unfortunately translated into violence. And this is what we have seen. Okay, we have, I mean, believe it or not, you have families being eliminated. I mean, a whole family in London, Ontario, people are just praying in a Quebec mosque, in Quebec City, just praying for 5-10 minutes, and they were shot and killed. So there's nothing wrong to go ahead and create certain rules, directions, and regulations, and make sure that people and providers, internet providers, carry the responsibility of what is being said and being spread around. They can create this outlines and the regulations. Again, should not contradict with my opinion on certain issues and express my opinion, but it is so clear when you go online and read what is hate and what is just freedom of expression. Yes.
That's all the time we have. Thanks for watching Local 514.